7 murdered, 3 attempted murdered, and an unbelievably gruesome family slaying. Family Matters with Jessie Dotson here on the Murder Mafia. Thank you for listening to the Murder Mafia. My name is Richard Bystrom, the Podfather, host of the Murder Mafia. With me, as always, is my consigliere, my right-hand man, my ace boon coon, Mr. Dylan Walker. How are you, Dylan?
I'm very good, actually. Thank you for asking.
So, for people that aren't not familiar with us, because you wouldn't be familiar with us, this is our first podcast. What we're going to do on the Murder Mafia is we are a group of people who find an odd pleasure in researching and trying to understand some of the most evil and psychotic people in the world. What we're going to do is we're going to focus on some of these smaller cases that you may or may not have heard of, but most likely have not heard of because they didn't, for some reason, get the attention in mainstream media that a lot of the bigger guys, your John Wayne Gacy's and your Ted Bundy's and your killers like that, did get in the media. Before we start, I'm just going to give you a little bit of detail about myself. I became interested in criminal justice and psychology back in college in the early 90s. I spent years living and dealing with murderers on a one-on-one basis. Really became fascinated with understanding their psyche, understanding their triggers, understanding what made them do the things that they do. I've literally read thousands of case files and tens of thousands of appeals just to kind of get a better sense of what in the world happens in these cases. Dylan, why don't you give us a little background on yourself?
I have been into killers and murderers for a while now. I have been studying criminal justice for a while now as well. It was one of those things where I kind of started to slowly get into it, and then it's kind of steamrolled into a bigger part of my life. So,
well, I mean, that's a good thing to focus on. I understand that you're also interested in doing some sort of a behavioral study with the FBI, specifically dealing with people like that.
Yeah, exactly. I want to kind of what you're talking about, how I want to study their behavioral and what makes them do what they do and what they think of after they do it.
So the first case we're going to talk about on our show here is Jessie Dotson. Maybe, in my opinion, one of the worst and most brutal, violent killings in United States history. And I'm not trying to be sensational or sensationalize this by any means. This man has 7 bodies to his name. First one, Miss Hallie Cox, was killed November 21st, 1994 in a bad drug deal. Served 13 years of an 18-year sentence. Jessie was released on parole August 27th of 2007. Completed his sentence just a few months later in January of 2008. But then March rolls around. Unfortunately for his family, they'll never see another March because on March 3rd, Cecil Dotson, 30 years old, Marissa Dotson, 27 years old, Marissa Williams, Hollis Seals, 33 years old, Shindri Roberson, 22 years old, Cemario Dotson, 4 years old, Cecil Dotson II, 2 years old, all died that day. To survive the attacks, 3 of the youngest victims, but survivors, Ceniyah Dotson, 2 months old, Cedric and Cecil Dotson Jr., 5 and 9 years old, respectively. These little children survived this. I mean, I can't even imagine what was going through this guy's head, Dylan.
No, I can't either. Especially the 9-year-old who remembers one of the main reasons Jessie got caught.
I think the only reason.
One of the only reasons he got caught. And to think about that he remembers what happened that day is absolutely horrifying.
So we're going to run down a little timeline here. March 1st. They basically, after work, we're going to watch a basketball game. They're going to barbecue. They go over there on the 1st to watch the Memphis basketball game. Next morning on the 2nd, Jessie Sr. went to pick up Jessie Jr. at the house, but he wasn't there. Nobody actually knew where he was. His girlfriend didn't know where he was. His sister, who he was living with at the time, didn't know where he was. There was speculation that once this all happened, there was a lot of speculation that was brought out, which will come to light later on. Turned out to be just a bunch of garbage. He also, on March 3rd, Jessie went to work with his father like nothing happened. Erica Smith, who is Cecil Dotson's baby's mother, went to pick up her son, but after calling, I believe the record was, it was put in court like 35 or 40 times over the weekend. nobody answering actually went there because it wasn't like them. Door was cracked open. She just had a feeling something was wrong. She actually called Jesse Sr., the dad, to do a drive-by to check in. But at the same time, the mom called the police to do a welfare check. By the time Jesse Sr. got there was already police cars there. This is when stuff really started to unfold. So Officer Randall Davis was called specifically to do the welfare check by the grandmother after not hearing from the family for a few days. What happens next is just unbelievable, Dylan.
Yeah, it was. The cops walked in and saw a horrific smelling of all senses crime scene. Visually and smell was horrible.
And the crazy part is the police officer, Officer Davis, described it as before he even got in the house, just from the outside, he could smell the blood. And for anybody who's not familiar with the smell of blood has an incredibly metallic, irony smell. It's very distinctive. And if you can imagine the blood of 9 victims in what was described as a very small house, let alone the front room, which I believe in the trial transcripts was only like 10 by 12, which is a very, very small room with 4 dead bodies. You can only imagine what that smelled like when you walked in.
Yeah, and you got to think about it, how they were murdered and how much blood loss there would be. That just explains how big of a smell that had to be and how bad of a smell that had to be.
Ironically enough, 2 of the firefighters, the first responders, one of them was actually represented one of the firefighter units that went to 9/11, said this was by far the worst thing he's ever experienced. And if you can imagine somebody that was a first responder to 9/11 seeing the things that they saw, to say something like that, and I'm sure 3 little, 5 children, if you think about it, Cemario, Cecil, both deceased, 4 and 2 years old respectively, Ceniyah, Cedric, and Cecil Jr., 2 months old, 5 years old, 9 years old, to see them has got to be completely explanatory as to why they felt like it was one of the worst things they'd ever seen.
Yeah, it had to be a mildly, or not even mild, it had to be a very disturbing scene.
I think shocking would be even a better term.
Shocking, yeah, absolutely.
That would absolutely have to be something that was a complete shock to the senses.
Mm-hmm.
So the crazy thing in here is that Jessie Dotson, who was the perpetrator here, wasn't even a suspect. The reason he wasn't a suspect is because, 1, there was no trace evidence. 2, the police literally said that he was never a suspect because they would never in a million years have guessed that somebody's family could have been cold-hearted enough to do something like that.
Yeah, it was absolutely crazy to think that the uncle would go, attempt to kill 9 people in a house. That was his family.
And especially the police would have never even considered it. Just his actions with the days after the murder. He went to dinner with his parents, knowing that he had slaughtered his entire family. He goes to dinner with his parents like there's just nothing wrong. What type of an absolute monster, sociopathic, psychopathic demon, could do something to where, like I said, you just literally slaughtered 9 people, and you're going to go dinner. You're going to dinner with your family, their parents, grandparents, like nothing happened.
Yeah, you're going to dinner with your mom and father and talking to them daily, knowing that you just killed their grandkids and just their bodies are just sitting there in a house rotting. That's not a normal person.
Nothing about this guy is normal, obviously.
Absolutely nothing.
So the way the whole crime scene was described is absolutely ridiculous. What happens is the officer walks in and he sees 3 adults, because the 4th adult in the living room was actually positioned behind a television, so you couldn't really see them when you walked in. The first thing he does is immediately call for backup, because you do not go into a crime scene like that not knowing whether or not the murderer is still there, or what you're going to find. They actually even they thought that there might have been, because of so many people dead at the initial look, that there may have been a carbon monoxide leak because so many people were just laying there dead. Obviously, as soon as he walked in, he kind of assessed the situation, realized that wasn't the case. But this was so bad that the first responders that responded didn't even check for pulses, because there was just giant coagulating pools of blood. and you just knew from the way they described it that nobody obviously survived that thing. So after he walks in, the first thing that he does is he starts walking through the house. The first room, he comes into the bathroom, and what a shock he would have had to have found, right?
Yeah, he found 9-year-old CJ in the bathtub with a 4.5-inch blade stuck in his skull. And he's actually the main reason Jessie got caught, and how they found out he was still alive was because of the little eye twitch. That's what's crazy about this.
I would have even said, I think 100% after I've read everything that has to do with this trial, I think he is the only reason he was convicted. There is nothing in this house that ties him to it, which is, if you've watched any CSI or, Criminal Minds or anything like that, the majority of it is it's fantasized. It's not realistic. But there is there's a term that says and I can't think of what it is off the top of my head. Anytime you in a crime scene, you are either taking evidence with you and you're leaving something behind. The ironic thing here was there was nothing left behind from Jessie. They had no idea what happened. The only reason he got caught is because when that little boy, his eye twitched, they realized there was a survivor there. He spent, I believe, almost a week in the hospital, basically going in and out of a coma, completely irrational.
Yeah, and when he finally came to, after going through that horrible thing, his direct words was, "Why would Uncle Junior do this to me?" And that's the only reason I think that Jessie got caught.
I absolutely, because like you said, the police asked him and they said, who did this to you? And he said, Junior.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, Uncle Junior. He said, yeah, Uncle Junior. That's what everybody knew Jessie by. And there's a lot of the funny thing is, and again, not funny because nothing about this is funny, but there was signs, I think, looking back now at this case, of Dotson's guilt. One of the very first things I think which really stood out in my mind, reading the court transcripts, especially reading the appeals, was the way that he acted immediately after. And I don't know how much of the appeals you've read, Dylan, but the crazy thing is that they were coming to pick, when they still assumed that this was a stranger that did it. The first thing Dotson started doing was ranting about how Cecil stole $300,000 from these gangster disciples, gang members, drug money. He stole their $300,000. It had to have been Doc Holliday, Cato, and Dredd. He said, you've got to be these three people.
Mm-hmm.
He started volunteering a lot of info really fast. Generally, when people start volunteering stuff like that so fast, there's something more that they're trying to hide because they're trying to steer people in a different direction.
Yeah.
The wild part about this is because Jessie was never a suspect, and they really were following this lead with the drug dealers and the gangster disciples and all this money. Jessie Dotson was with his sister when a cop car pulled up outside. What happened was they were just coming to pick everybody up to put them in a safe house in protective custody. Jessie actually had a gun and put it to his head and was threatening to kill himself because he knew that they were going to try and pin it on him. Well, why would you think that they were going to try and pin it on you unless you have a guilty conscience?
Absolutely. That's the crazy part about this, is that he's just a sociopath. Absolutely. I don't think he's been diagnosed as one, but he changed stories faster than anybody I think I've ever read. He maybe had 5 different stories in this trial, so it's crazy.
I think he had 5 different stories just in the interrogation.
Yeah, he may have had 5 different stories per hour, honestly.
And that's we'll get to that later on. He tried to use that as a defense afterwards, but that's actually what happened after he threatened to kill himself. They said they actually put the police on the phone with him and said, no, we're just here. We're taking you guys into a safe house, protective custody, because they really did believe that this had something to do with a drug, theft or something that had gone wrong. And while there was proof that there was issues between some of the gangster disciples members, of which Cecil was a member, several of the family members was, I actually believe. What happened, though, is that they said, and anybody that knows any gangster disciples, and I actually happen to have a very close friend who was convicted of murder and is a gangster disciple, the one thing that you learn about them is that no matter how bad the violation is that the gang member committed, and by violation, what they do is if they violate you, you've been found to have broken a bylaw of the gang, or you did something to put the gang in harm's way. what happened was is that they never attack family and children. That's out of the realm. The other thing that I think helped that part of the story fall apart is that Cecil had met with Doc Holliday just earlier that day because Doc wanted Cecil to do more work on his house. And unfortunately, I don't think Jessie was aware of this. So, believe it or not, these gang members, Kato, Dredd, and Doc Holliday, were all really helpful to the investigation.
Yeah, and it's just another thing that once this story collapsed, another story popped up by Jesse, and it just got him to become more and more of a suspect in this
exactly.
case. After he just folded on every single case or every single almost excuse on what happened, and eventually it just caught up to him, and all these webs of lies eventually just pointed all towards him.
And yeah, that was the whole thing, is that he was actually in protective custody when the youngest child, or when the 9-year-old, I believe Cedric Jr., like I said, came out of his coma. And when the detectives went and talked to him, they asked him, said, "Who hurt you?" And he said, "Uncle Junior," and then began to give a detailed account of exactly how everything happened. I mean, this 9-year-old little child remembers seeing 6 different people slaughtered in front of him. Meanwhile, his uncle's telling him, "Oh, you're not going to get hurt. You're not going to get hurt. You're going to be fine." And then proceeds to stab him in the head and break off the knife handle.
Yeah, he was a horrible, horrible person, and nobody, got the good end of the stick on how he killed him.
No pun intended, I'm assuming?
No pun intended.
Yeah, none of those sticks were any good.
No.
So here's the thing, is after about 12 hours of interrogation, they finally brought the tape in and said, "I'll tell you what we're going to do, Junior. This is what we're going to do." And the detective asked him, even, there's tapes of this, videotape. He said, "So what does your family call you?" And he said, "Junior." He said, "Only your family calls you Junior?" He said, "Yeah." And then he plays a tape of his nephew, his 9-year-old little nephew, with a 4.5-inch blade sticking out of his skull, pointing the finger at him. And then, and only then, did he finally say, "Yeah, I did it. I killed them babies. I killed my family." The first thing he did after giving his confession is he asked for his mother. I can understand. I mean, he knows he's probably at this point either going to die by execution, or he's definitely going to die in prison. Even she asks him, "Did you kill these people?" And he says, "Yeah, Mama, I did." And she said, "Well, what about the babies, Junior? What happened to the babies?" And his only response is, "I stuck them." And Mom looks at him in the eyes and goes, "Why, Junior? Why did you have to kill a 2-month-old baby?" You know what his response was, Dylan?
Yeah, he said, "Because they saw me."
And she said, "Junior, what's a 2-month-old baby going to do? They can't tell on you. They don't know anything." So this man beat and stabbed children. A 2-month-old little baby. That baby wasn't going to tell on him.
No.
Turns out, when everything was said and done, the reason he was so pissed off at everybody was because they didn't visit him in prison. He was so upset, so livid, so overcome with hatred because they didn't visit him in prison, he killed them all.
Yeah, and which the ironic part of that is how he brutally attempted to kill all the kids, and successfully 2 of them. None of those kids were alive when he got sentenced. Not a single one of them was alive.
Even if they were alive, what are they going to do? Take a metro bus to the prison and sign themselves in? It doesn't work like that.
Mm-mm.
And this man was so pissed off at his family, but not his mother and father, which I always thought was strange, who didn't visit him either. From the transcripts, the appeal transcripts, he only had 1 visitor in his 14 years. But he was so pissed off that people didn't visit him. He didn't kill his mother and father, but he killed all these people, including children, and tried to kill all these children. In my mind, it was almost like, and I still wonder to this day, did he leave his parents alive because they would have to live with the fact of knowing that he blames them for their deaths. He blames his parents not visiting. He blames his mother and father, his brothers and sisters, his nieces and nephews. He blames them for their own deaths because they didn't come see him.
Yeah, it just shows how horrible of a person this guy was.
So here's another wild part about the story, is that one of the reasons they knew something was off kilter right away is that how everything in the house was staged. And this is what they also believe why he didn't respond to anybody the day after the murders, because they believe that he was there setting the stage of this crime. And it was estimated by the medical examiner that this would have taken anywhere from 4 to 8 hours to stage. And let me explain why. every single body was moved into an unnatural position. And but what I mean by unnatural is I don't mean their heads were behind, their legs were behind their heads. What I mean is that they weren't where they were killed. All of the males, here's something weird. All of the males had their pants pulled down around their ankles.
Yeah.
Miss Roberson was seated on the floor with her pants pulled down to her ankles and a bag of crack shoved partially inside of her. One of the first reasons that they knew, obviously, that something had been staged is because Miss Roberson, who was shot several times in the leg, in a major artery, her pants were down around her leg, and while her pants were soaked, and rightfully so, because the blood from her heart still pumping was squirting blood all over the place, the bullet hole was in the pants that were pulled down, around her knees, and obviously that didn't happen after she was shot. Also, there was some bullet holes that would have been, or some of these wounds that would have been fatal, that were in places that, couldn't have been. If they died instantly, which they would have had to have done, they couldn't have taken their pants down, gotten in all these crazy positions, right? I mean, something like that, it automatically puts the police on guard.
Absolutely.
I mean, then we're looking at, like I said, Seals. He was the one that was next to the TV that they couldn't see when they first walked in. The bag of crack that was partially placed inside of Miss Roberson. There was also a bag of weed in Cecil's left hand, who was bent over the couch in a very unnatural position. The weird thing about that too is if that he was shot with the weed in his hand, there would have been blood all over the bag of weed. It would have only been natural. There was no blood on the bag of weed, which means that the blood had already congealed when that bag of weed was shoved in his hand. Otherwise, there's no way that it would have been dry, right?
Yeah, and it just points more to the stage. And you got to think of who would stage it and why would they stage it.
No, exactly. And when you've got somebody that's trying to come up with all these stories right off the jump, there was $300,000 stolen from the gangster disciples, blah, 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 blah. Now things start unraveling, but they still never suspected Jessie until the victim, told them what happened, because there was no way to ever suspect him. The other thing that they found, which was unbelievably strange, they knew that Jessie or somebody had thrown up in the bathroom and cleaned up, had actually physically cleaned out the sink.
Yeah, in the cross-examination, the prosecutor brought that up, that according to Jessie, and what he said, which is probably a lie, he said that he walked into, his whole story was that he was hiding under the bed when whatever happened, when the murders happened, and he came out and saw CJ in the bathtub, didn't check to see if he was okay, didn't call the police because he didn't believe in calling the police, puked in the bathroom sink, and then washed it down with bleach. That was his story. Exactly,
but you didn't call the police. You didn't try to help anybody. You did nothing but run away and save your own skin.
Yeah, he said that for some reason he didn't believe in calling the police. He didn't believe in the police.
Which, again, if you're dealing with somebody like that right off the bat, there are so many weird inconsistencies that it's just not really... if you're looking at his story as a whole, it just, looking back, didn't make a whole lot of sense.
There's so many red flags that pop up when you're going through his case.
Understatement of the year again. So here's the other thing, too, though, is that one of the weirdest things I believe that they found is they found a plastic bag with 21 shell casings. I mean, so the person that killed these people stayed around long enough to pick up 21 shell casings. I don't know if you understand how long it would take to do that.
I mean, yeah. I mean, you're sitting there and you're searching through a living room or, any part of the house, and there's 9 bodies, and you have to search through and find 21 bullet casings, and just be able to walk through and, just walk around bodies like that is insane.
And here's the other thing, too, is that, and I don't know, again, this was part of appeal that was filed with the Supreme Court. There was 5 different broken boards found that he'd used to beat these children. There was 5 different knife blades, 2 broken knife blade handles. They actually figured that he'd actually broken the handle off many of these knives just so that he could avoid, fingerprint detection.
Yeah. I mean, he broke, if we're going back, I mean, the boards and the knives were all broken off in the children. I mean, that's just horrible.
Well, yeah, it's pretty bad. So obviously, needless to say, he was sentenced to 6 death sentences, plus 120 years for the 3 attempted murders. Crazy part again here is, though, is that his complete lack of anything, his complete lack of empathy, his complete lack of just any remorse whatsoever. The only time he even showed any semblance of giving a damn was really when it was about him getting busted. The look in his eyes and the speech patterns, the only thing he cared about was what was going to happen to him. He was going to have to spend the rest of his life, or hopefully his very short life, in prison. Even when, he was going to kill himself when the police came to move him to the safe house because the police, he just knew they were going to try and pin it on him because of his past. That's not the actions of an innocent man. That's somebody who's trying to draw attention away from things and make himself look like a victim.
No, he's absolutely a self-centered person. If you want to watch the trial or the cross-examination, you can. There are videos of them on YouTube. Of course, not the greatest quality because it's been a while. But you can see him. There's a video on the murdermafia.com on his blog of him smiling and smirking in the courtroom. And it just kind of shows he had zero remorse. I watched a news video of when he was in prison. This was like 4 years ago, and he still showed no remorse. It's just not a normal human being to do any of this.
And I wouldn't even say remorse. It almost looked like he was taking pride that he finally got the chance to tell his story. That he was the one that was going to take center stage finally.
He finally got attention that he wanted.
That's a great way to put it. He finally, almost like an absolute psychotic case of Munchausen's. Like you said, he finally got the chance to get the attention that he wanted the whole time and didn't care what he had to do to get the attention. That was his chance, and the spotlight. That was his 15 minutes of fame. And unfortunately, you've got the 9 victims in this crime. Plus, you've got Hallie Cox, who he killed a drug deal gone bad, that have paid the price for this guy. And I'm not, I will say this. Prison does a lot of crazy things to people, okay? When you're in prison, time stops for you. Everything is the same for you. You eat the same meals. You have the same regimen. You wear the same clothes. You're on the same schedule. Time stops. When you come home from something like that, and he spent almost 14 years away, the world didn't stop. Things were completely different for him. If you think about it, when he went to prison, people didn't have cell phones. It was 1994. Nobody, I shouldn't say nobody, but very, very few people had cell phones. When he came home in 2008, everybody had a cell phone.
Yeah, you get put into prison in the mid-90s and got released in almost the 21st century. So there's a huge reality change there.
Well, yeah, you're talking about, there being everybody having a cell phone, everybody having computers, everybody, all these different things that you have basically completely been living in a cave for 14 years, had no access to. And then you add on top of it having the absolute total resentment of your entire family, who obviously in his eyes didn't care about him enough to come see him. You're talking about a ticking time bomb. And unfortunately for him, and he gave the cockamamie story that after, when he got dropped off there, that him and his brother got to arguing, which actually was factually proven that they were arguing. But he tried to say his brother pulled the gun, and when his brother did, he just started shooting. That was proven to be a lie.
And he staged that, of course.
But the gun, there was a sawed-off shotgun that was within arm's reach of Cecil, but there was no fingerprints on it. There was nothing. So basically, the way it looks from all the evidence was that they got to arguing, which was, again, factually proven by somebody who had been calling the house and heard them arguing. But then basically Jesse got pissed off and just started shooting everybody. He didn't give a damn who it was. When he ran out of bullets, he got knives and boards and sticks and beat those babies to death with them. The fact that there was 3 survivors, first of all, was an absolute miracle. Thank you, sweet baby Jesus, all 6 pounds, 8 ounces of you in your little fleece-lined golden manger. But the fact that he took the time to clean up himself, he actually stole his nephew's bike to ride to his girlfriend's house after the murder. She didn't see any blood. They actually found clothes afterwards. Again, if you read the appeal, they found his bloody clothes. He finally led them to where it was. But this is something that even crazy people don't do this.
No.
There's a lot of crazy people out there, but they don't slaughter their entire families. Unfortunately, if you're going to listen to us, you're going to hear a lot about these people that did kill all their family, their children, their parents, their spouses, whoever, strangers. But this is not something that people, even psychopaths, do.
No, not at all. Yeah, this is beyond crazy. This is not even borderline. This is almost, if you could come up with a word, past insanity. This is what this case is.
And it's one of those cases to where you look at and you go, how did people not know about this guy? How was this not more publicized? I lived in Tennessee when this happened. I didn't know about it.
I live in Tennessee as well, still, and I've never heard about it till a couple months ago when he brought it up to me.
Exactly. When I brought it up to you, you read the case file and you're like, wait, really? What? How did nobody know about this? Because how could this not be put out there? How could the entire world not know about a monster like this who slaughtered his entire family and nobody knows? And unfortunately, is it one of those things where the world just doesn't care, or that people are so desensitized to things like this that they might have known about it and they just didn't care?
Slight highlight of the story is that one of the slightly good things that happened is when the police got there. Because the 9-year-old CJ did not have a ton of time left. His breathing was so shallow you couldn't see the kid breathing. If that
the fact that he was laying in a tub with a blade sticking out of his brain for 3 days.
Yeah, and thank God they got there that time when they did, and he was able to live and tell them, because I think this monster would still be walking around the streets if it wasn't for CJ.
Oh, 100%. And the fact that the medical examiner testified that the blade was literally, I think, 1/8 of an inch from a major blood vessel in the brain, or if the blade would have been pulled out of his brain before the blood started coagulating, he very well might have bled out. Just tells you how brutal this crime was, not to mention that he stabbed and beat a 2-month-old with boards and these Farberware kitchen knives that they'd found all over the place. But he took the time to break the handles off the knives he used and to hide the blades, and they only found, I believe, 2 of the kitchen handles out of all the knives that he was using.
Yeah, so it's just another a crazy case, and a crazy person who did these horrific things.
Well, I think that's kind of going to bring us to the end of our first episode here of the Murder Mafia. If you like what you hear, please visit us at themurdermafia.com. If you did enjoy what you're listening to, please go to iTunes, give us 5 stars. The only way we can get out to more people and do more of these shows, if we're recognized by iTunes, they move you up the charts based on how many likes and comments that you have. So please feel free to leave us a comment. Feel free you can email me directly at info@themurdermafia.com or themurdermafia at outlook.com. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. If you have suggestions for a case you want us to look at, I'll be happy to do that. But on behalf of myself, the Podfather, Rich Bystron, we look forward to hearing from you and seeing you in the future. And thanks for listening.